So is this a black film in that sense of the definition of what a black film is?
It's a black film just like it's not a black film.
Mm.
This could be a family drama. This could be a dramedy. It could be a comedy. So it was funny. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Because that's like saying, like, when the movie comes out, right, and you get it on Blu-ray or 4K, could it be in the black section? Yes. Could it be in the drama section? Yes. Could it be in the comedy section? Yes. But regardless of what it is and how many layers it has to it and the bigger story that it has, just like in the movie, when they put his book in the black section, even though it had nothing to do with the plight of black people, they would do the same thing with this. Meta.
That's the reality of it, but it also plays to what he said. Why is it in this section? Because like you said,
because a black person's in it.
Right. That's the definition for, the bookstore with that book. And I guess it could be the definition of depending on where the movie is sold. As we were just talking about, as you mentioned, it could have been, for us, it is what it is. It was specifically made with an African-American in that role for that reason, to be able to make it more profound, and make it what it is. But good writing is good writing. And I think the concept of it.
Yeah, because I'll say it like this. Him being a writer or a teacher, did that make it a black story? No.
Right.
The student challenging him on that subject, yes, that made it a black story. Did him being a writer make it a black story? No. Whether the publishing company wanted from him, did it make it a black story because it was compromising narrative? Yes.
So we're talking about just the reality of point by point of him being a black person in that role. Because in my mind, I'm like, well, what if it was a white student talking to a white professor? You know what I'm saying? That said, I'm fine with this. Why aren't you fine with it? You know what I mean? So I just see there's ways of like substituting out his ethnicity and putting another one in and wondering, thank goodness we don't have to wonder because the story was written that way and produced that way and shown to us that way. But I like the writing in it. You know what I think? I just think it would not be the same story. It would be different.
Because it depends on the director and the writer and stuff like that. But it could be the same story, but somebody else directed it. That's like, okay, like Beverly Hills Cop. That was supposed to be for Sylvester Stallone. But instead, Eddie Murphy got it. And Eddie Murphy put Eddie Murphy in it and it became a whole other thing.
Right.
Now, I would consider that a black movie, but it's starring Eddie Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
Will Smith in I Am Legend or Men in Black. I don't consider those black movies, but he's the lead in them.
Right.
And neither does The World. That's probably why they're successful.
That was wrong, but moving along. Moving along.
What part was wrong?
I'm just kidding.
For clarification.
I mean, clearly those are good examples because, like you said, that's you could put anyone in those particular roles, as you mentioned. This one obviously was conceived, was just basically meant for the nuances, the layers, the complexities of it to be exactly what it is.
I just think that the whole thing is a dangerous bag. It was presented to be a thing to highlight, but then it turned into be a trick bag where once you go in, it's an abyss and it's not as clear on what the thing is. I think a lot of stuff is being labeled a certain way before we get a chance to let the world decide. And I think the way this being labeled determines kind of like how society is going to treat it. Like if you gave it the rollout like any other kind of movie, if you put it in the same theater that you put in a normal movie, could people see it as being like, hey, I just want to check out this movie with Jeffrey Wright because I like him, But the fact that, it's not advertised well or it's put in a small theater and all that kind of stuff, that kind of stuff lends to stuff. It's almost like, that's like in the grocery store. If you had an apple that was on a shelf with a shining light on it and you had an apple in the corner, it could be the same apple. Which apple would you go for? So some of this stuff is kind of like manipulation anyway. And so the thing that you'd be like, oh, we're highlighting, black, this, whatever, it could be the equivalent. Yeah, but it's in the corner though.
But here's the thing that I find ironic about that. Me saying, how do we classify it, but could it be classified as something else? And then you describing how this movie was actually placed in a small theater, kind of like you said, not advertised as much. And it's almost like, so you were just treated like a black person, you know what I mean? Like in the end, you did all of this big production, and in the end, even the way it's advertised, even the way it's shown, it's a box that's kind of checked off.
Yeah, and that's how things work anyway, because you got to play into certain things because you're trying to figure out who's your audience. It's always about who's your audience, and you're trying to figure out who can you catch with it. And they probably thought, like, if we cut it this way, white people ain't gonna go see that. And if we cut it this way, maybe they will. And you might have black people already because of all the people that's in it, maybe. So I'm sure it's all this brainstorming. And I'm sure that the director didn't do all this time trying to make this movie to cheap out when it came to promoting it. So I'm sure it wasn't like this thing where he wanted to little himself. I don't think nobody wanted to do that. They just want to be an artist first, right? I don't think nobody, like I said, the whole black category, like I said, before that stuff makes it, like I said, it's interesting. I understand for the situation that stuff got to be labeled and categorized a certain kind of way so it could be found, right? But depending on what it is, if it's something more, then it's dangerous because you could get lost in it, right? Like on a team, the great player stands out. Everybody notices. The bad person that never plays well, they stand out. The consistent person in the middle that never drops the ball, always gets it in, nobody notices that. Right? But he's on the team. But you got 3 different things going on there and only 2 things being seen. And the other one's just lost. And so it's a lot of stuff that might fit into a lot of categories. And sometimes, I don't know if having a black category is the category that it was sold. Because we don't really need for somebody to tell us that it's the black category. Is this for us to find it? Or is it for them to avoid it? Because it's easy for me to spot. Nobody has a hard time finding anything to do with us any other kind of way. So when it comes to our art and stuff like that and media, then it has a sign on it. But like I said, who's the sign for? Everybody else is good at spotting us out, and we're good at spotting ourselves out. So who's the sign for who helps us decide what's going to be, quote unquote black when it doesn't fit into one box?
Gotcha.
Now, if a category is saying action because you want to hear narrative and story, then yeah, it works. If you want to put horror because you want to see somebody dying on screen, yeah, it's good to have that because you don't want to walk into a situation you don't want to see.
Right.
A drama, okay, then yeah. If you want to see explosions and action, then yeah. So for those things, that's fine. But we start saying like, they don't do, Italian movies or whatever. They don't do it. But as soon as you say black, like we can tell that from the box and the cover of the person who's in it or the person that's in there. We know it's a black person in it, and it may or may not have their narrative in it, or it may or may not, show them as a full person. It could be just a token person. It could just be like the person who dies first or whatever, or the comic relief or whatever. May not have any extra insight on that person. We don't know. It's a gamble. And that's what black people writing us, and that's what white people writing us. That's a gamble. It's just depending on the person insightful who is writing this thing. So, who was that black section for? Do we still need it?
I don't think so.
Does it help?
I mean, I don't think so. Even in a sense of like when I go to a bookstore, obviously we've kind of been used to being, going to those sections immediately. Like if we're looking for a book that's by a black author, but I don't think so. If I'm looking for, a book on poetry, it's not saying black poet, or art, black art,
Okay. So this is different, like themes, right? Now, if you want to learn about, or something who's talking about something that you're into, if you want to hear about, hot combs or a certain kind of food or certain kind of places, you could easily find a black author writing about those things without it being necessarily, you know what I mean? Like subject matter will pull you. The subject matter will kind of get you to where you're going to versus like, if it's separated like that, that's different. But to be like black, like I said, the only reason why that kind of stuff works, especially like with books and stuff back in the day, is because otherwise the big companies would not order those things. And so it was a whole bunch of stuff that was being ignored. So it was enough of those things being ignored to be put in one place so people could find it. That's the only reason. Because if they were being fair and just put out everything that was out there that was quote unquote good, there would have been no need for no specialty. It's only specialty when it's being, ignored or left out. That's why it's a specialty. Otherwise, it's normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Hollywood Shuffle, that could just be in comedy. And I could just look under Hollywood and now I'll find the movie. I wouldn't need to be in the comedy black section to find Hollywood Shuffle. It could just be in regular comedy under Robert Townsend because I like him or I know the name of my movie. Everybody else seems to find everything. But like I said, with the bookstores and the movies, like I said, before I understand, because it wasn't accessible and it was no other way to get it.
Right.
So I understand. But that should have been something more used by us than everybody using it. Because now it's like a toilet for other people.
But then you could also say that about, like, you know, in stores and stuff. I mean...
Yeah, like, was he happy when his book was in the black section? No, he wasn't. But guess what?
I'm talking about, like, the hair care and stuff like that, how that's, you know, separated and stuff like that, too. And
I'm saying, like, even in the movie.
Marketing.
But you see what hurt, you know, Issa Rae's book wasn't in that section. So how is that for everybody? Right. You think 12 Years a Slave book would be in the black section? It's about slaves. Driving Miss Daisy, that's about a black guy, right? Driving this white woman around. Would that be in the black section?
Interesting.
Is it?
I don't know. I would say no. No.
The Green Book, would that be in the black section?
Yeah, that should be in the black section.
You think it would be? So if you went to Barnes Noble, you think it would be in the black section?
No, it wouldn't be.
Yeah, of course it wouldn't.
Because then when you look deeper into that, the characters were probably equal to each other, but the premise of the books or the movies was not basically centered on them. It was centered on, you know,
how's the 12 Years a Slave the guy was equal? Or a chauffeur driving this rich white woman. How is that equal?
Not equal in the sense of equality. You know, that's
equal as in what?
Completely different. I'm talking about as far as the way that it was basically put out there is basically just kind of like you know, it's not a black film because it's not solely about him. It's about, you know, it opens with, if I can remember, Driving Miss Daisy. Yeah, I don't remember the opening, but I do think I remember her son, you know, basically talking to her about she couldn't drive anymore. They didn't show Morgan Freeman in the beginning of the film, so you knew it was about her dilemma of like not being able to drive anymore.
So I just think, depending on the narrative, my point is that it's wishy-washy as far as what goes to what.
Yeah.
Who's saying it and the success of it and the narrative. Because we're going by a black person in it, then it's a black movie, or a black person who stars in it, then the lines are messed up then.
Yeah.
It's not consistent. I guess that's my point. Just like in the movie, her ignorant book was in not the black section.
Right.
Which stood out to him where he's like, I'm going to go get my books and bring them over here too.
So that was the popular section, you know, in a sense of, because her books were selling. Okay.
And then his was what? And the rest of the black books in the black section. What was that then?
I don't know. Why are you asking me? I don't know. I'll tell you what that guy said. I'll tell you what that man said. I don't work here. You know, I just work here. That's all. I don't decide where the books go.
I'm just saying that whole thing. I just question the validity of the black section. I understand how it could be used and it could be helpful, and I understand how it also could be used against us in a way to just be dismissive of it and just be like, you know, as if our stories isn't relevant to anybody outside of being black. And I think that's not fair. I think that we have a lot more to say. It's a lot more insight in our stories than just like, you know, those poor black people or that smart black person or that black super, you know. I think that the way it got whittled down is not helpful. I guess I'll say that.
You're talking about the category, the section.
Yeah. But like I said, like I said, this is like a regular movie, and I wouldn't necessarily look for this in a black section if I was looking for black movies necessarily. I wouldn't. Because I think it was more than that. But I'm always questioning even having the black section anyway. It should just be right with everything else, but it's separate. But
I mean, I specifically think that, and I don't know if I have the real logic behind it, just in the sense of how it's being recognized and nominated for all these awards. You know what I mean? I don't think it's, you know, we all love Black Panther, but like, how many nominations, did we get for that? We got some, but it was, like Angela Bassett and the technical stuff, costuming and stuff like that. But like this film is getting it because of the acting and because of the message that was basically relayed. And I think that people voted, the Academy voted because it was a good film,
I think that, like most panels, it might not be exactly how we think it's set up. And so for that reason, I don't really trip. I'm happy when it works in our favor, but then do I think that is, honest and good reasons? No. Just like Denzel Washington getting it for Training Day. Just like Halle Berry getting it for A Monsters Ball. Sometimes you just be up. Sometimes it's your turn. Sometimes, something happened last year and they need to rectify it. Sometimes, no, there wasn't enough competition. Sometimes, whatever. Sometimes stuff just lines up. But, like Broken Clock is right 2 times a day. And so certain things, like when it always seems to be off and it seems to be working, I question when it's working. Not saying I won't take it being right at that moment, but like, why is it right when it's normally not? Like somebody who hates you, like they could be nice and bring you some lunch, but when you look at the lunch kind of funny.
You mean, would you eat the lunch?
I mean, would you look at the lunch funny if you ate it or not? Like when they say, "Here you go," I'm talking about that point, not even eating it, but like, "Here you go." Wouldn't you be like, "Since when?"
Right.
Like you like me? You care if I'm hungry? I don't know. Like I said, I wanted to win. I wanted to do good and stuff, but like I said, I don't put too much into all that stuff. Only because I know that, I've been on a panel.
Right.
All right, now I'm being silly. We gotta get done.
There's always a panel.
I'm getting honest. I gotta go.
Cut.
Getting honest. I gotta go. Oh man.